Hi, and welcome to the Wonkat Weekend Live Chat. I'm Robin Panacchia, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson. Um, Please like, share, and subscribe. I figured I'd toss that in at the beginning so the people who leave us towards the end also hear it.
Very wise, Robin. How are you?
Allergic to literally everything today, so just as a forewarning, I may have to block myself out for a second and go have a sneeze attack should one occur. It's
All right.
unpleasant, but
Well, we'll keep this one tight and to the point. Moving in, Donald Trump, former
yes.
president of the United States, indicted for the third time and since April, I believe. And the latest charges from special counsel Jack Smith, who had previously charged him in his light espionage documents hoarding case, has now finally charged him um, for his involvement, which is all of it, with January 6th. I want to pause here before reading the specific charges to state how actually, despite people talking about a sad day in America, because it's actually always a good day in democracy, regardless of what your politics are. It's a good day when a president is held accountable for actual crimes committed while president, and is not immune from those crimes just because he's president. So these charges include conspiracy to defraud the United States, which is what Trump was attempting to do by submitting fake electors, to outright ignore clear results from the people that wanted nothing more to do with him, despite more than 62 court cases challenging the very clear election results, and he'd lost all of them. He was still, until the end, trying to overturn a free and fair election, with the intent to use the Insurrection Act to put down any potential protests of violence. I will get back to that in a moment because that's a larger discussion I want to have with you, Robin. But next, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, which is when his mob crashed the Capitol. Clearly, this does not happen without Donald Trump. These people would, January 6th is not a day that's on anyone's calendar, sort of usually like Arbor Day or something, but he made it a big thing. Um,
What, you don't
and
celebrate Arbor Day?
he
Arbor Day Foundation. Sorry.
he made it a very big thing. He talked about running, he spoke specifically ramping up the mob, refusing to concede,
Yeah.
talking about how it was fraud and you don't have a country anymore and you need to go down, and clearly a lot of what, mob style threats towards um, members of Congress, which led directly to the attack where people could have been killed, were killed. And So, and the third, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. His clear intent was to stop the vote counting. And what's particularly grotesque was that even if this, even he was not involved in inciting the mob, he clearly, and this has been shown, clearly tried to capitalize on it by trying to delay the count. He had, instead of like trying to call off the mob while the mob
Yeah.
is present in the Capitol, his fellow thug Rudy Giuliani, who, because I'm a black man who lived in New York, I've never liked. I know that was white
I
people
never
like this
liked
guy
him
for a
either.
brief
But
period,
yeah.
but I was never a fan of Giuliani, and I'm very glad that everyone sees him for the scumbag he is. Um, he was trying to call senators and call congressmen, trying to delay the certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory. Um, and then the fourth, conspiracy against rights, which is a uh, post sort of Civil War statute, and this specifically is Trump's attempt to disenfranchise millions of voters, specifically black voters. Um,
Yeah.
Deny. I mean, he wanted to deny everyone, white and black, who had voted against him, um, their franchise, but specifically when overturning during his frivolous failed lawsuits, he was specifically targeting um, black counties, even
Mm,
ones that had voted about the same as Hillary as they'd voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. It was some of the Biden's performance was from overperformance amongst relative overperformance among white voters in suburban areas, but he was because he's racist, he was specifically targeting these areas. So 78 total charges so far. Um, and he's still the clear and away front runner for the
yeah,
Republican nomination.
because they
Um,
don't care. And I hate to say it, but like honestly, they really have no reason to actually care because like they want him. They want him to do like what he's gonna. There's really no amount of crime that he can do that is gonna make people say no. I don't want the things that I want. And he's the one who's like, I'm gonna give you the things that you want.
well, yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is not even trying. So I'd written about this Wednesday. The candidates theoretically running against him, as generally speaking, when your political opponent who is beating you is indicted for trying to overthrow the government, it's something you mention.
Mhm.
And most of them, instead, from DeSantis to Tim Scott, instead, they are defending Trump and attacking the weaponized Biden um, Department of Justice, which is
Yeah,
nonsense.
because they're not
Everyone knows,
stupid.
but
They know that the voters are not gonna like there's nothing that they can say to those voters that is gonna make them go, oh, you know what, maybe Trump's a bad guy. Like clearly no one can do
yes.
this.
Well, they will lose anyway, so one would say it's better to lose of your dignity, whatever you might have of it. Oddly enough, Mike Pence has been starting to outright state that, Trump and his crackpot lawyers, direct quote from Pence, were pressuring him to basically violate the Constitution and so forth. I'm writing about this for tomorrow about how somewhat it's self-serving because Pence was struggling with this choice, but you know better to ultimately make the right choice and then kind of whitewash how you were almost tempted to make the wrong one than to make an overtly bad choice, as all these Republicans are doing, and then later try to explain away how I almost decided to
Yeah.
stand up to Trump. So, God forbid Mike Pence, Chris Christie, these are the folks who are actually, making some basic statement that this is not how you should be behaving. The one thing that was also bizarre, uh, Trump is clearly unraveling, which is delightful to see because he's a terrible human being, and that's enjoyable. One of the ways in which he is he's threatened Jack Smith, pretty much specifically, but others as well, with charges of saying that anyone who comes after him, he will come after. Uh, and that's
Yeah.
when he posted that on Truth Social, that inspired the special counsel's office to put a protection order out against him. His lawyer has until Monday to respond. His lawyer apparently claims he's way too busy to respond to the protection order, even though he's on all the Sunday shows this
Yeah.
weekend. Um, Basically, absurdly claiming that this is all a violation of Trump's free speech uh, rights. We can get into that later. And then his and also that wants the venue moved to the more diverse West Virginia instead of DC. So DC is actually, despite being called the Chocolate City, it's like maybe 50% black, maybe slightly less.
Mhm.
Whereas West Virginia is like 92% white. It's not actually
Yeah.
diverse. It's not diverse politically. I mean, Oregon's very white, but you could say that it's pretty diverse politically. There's
Yeah.
Portland, which has a reputation, but there's rural areas. No, West Virginia is pretty right leaning, and Trump. It's sort of one of the most Trump voting states, other than say Tennessee.
Yeah.
It's an absurd. It's an absurd request, and but it just goes to show how desperate Trump is because these are actually serious crimes. We talk about Mike Pence not going through with the coup, and perhaps minimizing the I mean, if he had gone along with it, which would have been in his self interest, the question is, what would Democrats have been prepared to do? And I think what we realized from the indictment was that the Trump world, specifically Eastman and others, were prepared to John Eastman, one of the crackpot lawyers advising
Yeah.
Trump, were prepared to put in the Insurrection Act to essentially use the inevitable protest if Pence had sent the,
Yeah.
rejected it, gone back to the legislatures, which Republican controlled, would have put in those specific swing states, would have been enough to put Trump back in office clearly against the public will, clearly an overturning of democracy, the
Mhm.
end of the American experiment, so as you might say, and that would have been enough. But they were prepared to wage war against the American people, anyone who um, protested. And what we saw, Robin, obviously during 2020, was that um, it's very difficult for Democrats, because when they're sort of with protests for about 18 minutes, and then on 20th minute, like on minute 19, someone somewhere like trips over a cop and the cop's toe is stubbed, and then suddenly they are very scared and like, no, no, don't resort to violence, and don't. And so it would have been very easy for, essentially, once the protests start to go violent, inevitably they might have, and instead of like saying this is what
Mhm.
Trump has wrought, it would have been more of, the public is out of control, we do need the police to crack down on this. And I think it would have been a case of, okay, I guess Trump is president again, and then there'd
Yeah.
been like some fundraising emails sent to people.
Oh.
That's like January 8th. So that, I mean, am I just being overly cynical,
No,
or?
I don't think that you are. I think it's very, very hard for, like, especially like the kind of Democrats that have actual power, um, tend to be very like, well, we don't want to like, make a big fuss or anything here. You don't want to like, rock the boat too much because people won't like that. And so it's very like, I think they do have a certain amount of trouble fighting because they want to be like, we're the taking the high road. We're the ones who are like following the rules. And even if other people don't follow the rules, we're still going to follow the rules. And I guess if you say you're president, what can we really do? Like, and
Yeah,
I think there's, definitely an element of that, which is also why I think so many are like confused about like, hey, why aren't Trump voters getting upset or not? Or, why don't they care that he's been indicted? They didn't like when they thought Hillary Clinton was doing shit like they accuse him of doing, or that they accuse her of doing. Um, and it's because there's no rules. There's no rules. They don't care if he breaks the law. He said himself that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his people would still support him, and he was not
sure.
wrong.
Well, I don't think it's anarchy. It is
Yeah,
more autocracy. One of the clear views is there's out groups, in groups. The out
yeah.
group can do whatever the hell it wants. The in group cannot. I mean, in group can, the out group can't, and you oppress the people in the out group. And that's
Mhm.
the point of the law. That's the point of law enforcement.
Yeah.
So when it becomes a sort of either too cute by half, or sort of I call it non-constructive naivete. So when
Mhm.
Democrats are posting all this stuff about, I thought you were the party of law and order. Well, that law and order was all about kicking my
Yeah.
black ass. That was never that was never about Aunt Mayberry or something. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Or even
you
Jerry Orbach.
exactly. Yeah, it was never about that. So you need to accept that this is, but they can't, because they can't accept the idea that an entire political party, and arguably a majority of white people, support autocracy. Essentially, that's been an American story throughout our history. They ignore something I'm writing about for tomorrow is in Augusta, Georgia, um, in 2020, a Democrat won the DA, black man, for the first person, and in like 20 years or so, and was immediately um, the white conservatives said, let's just separate out the predominantly white county. And then all the black people who had voted for this guy in
Yeah.
that white county now are going to be um, subject to the right wing DA they put in charge there. And there's cases, of course, in Mississippi, they put um, a sort of own court of handpicked prosecutors over a majority black town or city there. They don't respect democracy. They never have. That's gone
Yeah.
back to post Civil War. There's never been a point in America where a majority of white people have really been all on board on democracy. So, but
That's
yes, the
not
soft coup
true.
was clear. The soft coup was clear, so that you justify the law, throw the election to Trump, and be prepared, as they'd seen during the summer of 2020, the Democrats would fold as soon as, because it wouldn't be them doing the violence, it would be
Yeah.
they're just saying Trump's president now. And when the inevitable response comes from the undesirables, you can imagine the army of Kyle Rittenhouses
Yeah.
patrolling the streets, killing people. Um, and then that's just law and order being imposed, and they would just sort of, again, okay, well, let's wait till 2022 or maybe 2024, and that's just it, because you'd rather, almost like battered spouse syndrome, rather have the illusion of a family unit that is functional rather than
Yeah.
accept the
Oh yeah.
reality of how terrible it is. And that's something they sort of need to actually
Putting the crazy
comprehend.
lettuce in the attic. Mhm.
uh, One other thing Trump did. So during his spiraling madness, he had tweeted, uh, I guess Sunday today on Truth Social, Trump attacked former Speaker Nancy Pelosi
Oh,
for say, because she had said he looked like a scared puppy when he flew to
oh my
DC last
God.
week to face his arraignment. And I'm going to quote what he says here. I purposely didn't comment on Nancy Pelosi's very weird story concerning her husband, but now I can, because she said something about me with glee that was really quite vicious. I wasn't scared. Nevertheless, how mean a thing to say. She is a wicked witch whose husband's journey from hell starts and finishes with her. She is sick. She's a sick and demented psycho who will someday live in hell. Oh, quotes. So,
If hell is all caps, is hell all caps?
hell is in fact all
Yeah.
caps.
Yeah.
Uh, Marjorie Taylor Greene delivers warning from her home gym that we're post Constitution with third Trump indictment, because the man who keeps committing crimes is held accountable for those crimes. It's
Well,
like,
that's not
feels like
supposed to happen.
communism.
That's not supposed to happen. They said no. They said no. Therefore, it's the Constitution. If they're like Trump should be able to do whatever he wants, that's the Constitution. That is how the right works. They make it up as they go along.
Yes.
And yet they accuse us of, not, they're like, oh no, we're originalists. And, originally they all agreed with us. We know that because we're psychic. But
Well, one of Green's talking points is one that a lot of folks on the right are saying about this is all free speech. And like Hillary Clinton said the election was stolen, Green rants, and that everybody parroted her talking points. Stacey Abrams said her election was stolen, running for governor here in Georgia. Of course, Abrams and Clinton all conceded these
yeah,
elections. Al Gore conceded. He did not, and he was vice president. He did not reject the Supreme Court's ruling and throw the election back to the legislatures or whatever. And, you know, the actual indictment is not about Trump running around ranting that early voting cost him the election. Um, you know, instead, it's been a sort of pattern of him orchestrating a coup to remain in power. Hillary Clinton didn't work with Barack Obama and Joe Biden to try to overturn Trump's electoral college victory on an actual logical basis that she actually won more votes, because she won the popular vote. So she did not there was no concerted effort to have electors support her instead of Trump, to throw out electors. She didn't file frivolous lawsuits. She conceded like within 24 hours. So, that's just an absurd it's an absurd statement, but these folks just
Mhm.
lie to give people the grounds to um just you know uh, rationalize their own fear that somehow Trump is a victim, even though he's about to be indicted for the fourth time apparently in Georgia for trying to overturn the Biden's not particularly close, because 10,000 votes or 11,000 or so votes is not particularly close as
Yeah.
of been in past elections. And that's yet
It
another one
doesn't,
where
this
he's
is the thing. It doesn't matter if it's close. It doesn't matter. Like, the reason he's doing it is so that his people see him doing it. Like, that's
Mhm.
literally like so that they get to go, oh, he's fighting for us. And that's like truly
Yes,
what they
I
want.
mean, it's just that they were saying it's closer. Just but the reason I
Yeah.
mentioned that is because historically, people have conceded without question when it's been about 10,000 votes. It's like not
Yeah.
like, oh, it's 10,000 votes. Let's have multiple recounts. Like you have recounts over like 1,000 votes, maybe, or 500 or something, like in when Al Franken won or something, in 2008.
Yeah.
But here, um, a very clear victory. He calls Raffensperger spreading complete nonsense. This is of January 2nd. Um, Complete nonsense about how the election was stolen and demanding that Raffensperger find the votes for him and overturn it. And this is all on tape. And he's even clearly threatens him, basically saying, well, you can get a lot of trouble for promoting these lies, you and your lawyer. So obviously, but they weren't lying, but it's a clear
Yeah.
threat. So um he's facing a state charge. State charge, he can't actually be he can't pardon himself in a state charge. However, I believe the governor could, but I don't know if Kemp would get involved in that. And who knows? As someone said, if he became president again, he could just have, God knows what he would do. He could have the DA there imprisoned on some BS charge. So it's it's just fascinating. His legal, he's just spiraling. It is delightful to see in the sense of it's dangerous. I feel sorry for the people being threatened by him and in the path of his
Yeah.
rage, but he's not happy. And it's always a good thing when Donald Trump is not happy. He's facing accountability for some just
Oh,
vicious
yeah.
crimes against the nation. And yeah, he deserves everything that comes to him.
I mean, it does seem like the bet that a lot of Republican voters are taking is that, even if he is found guilty, they'll still for him for president and he'll be able to pardon himself. Like that's what that is what I have heard, like on the grapevine.
Yes.
Like like that's
Um,
what they're like, oh well, who cares? Because as soon as he's president again, he can just pardon himself.
yeah, it is hard to. I think there's two. I mean, I never like to predict the future. What is difficult for Trump here, and polls show it fairly evenly divided between
Yeah.
Biden and Trump, but evenly matched. But Trump, in 2016, Trump was a different candidate, and I think people who hate Trump on the left get very up in their feelings if you try to say how he was a good candidate, especially in relation to Hillary Clinton. But get up in your feelings, I will say he was someone who he had no solutions, but he was recognizing some challenges for particular demographic of voters in the Rust Belt. He was connecting with them. He was doing in a way that his Republican opponents weren't, and a lot of Democrats weren't interested in really doing. And that was how sort of he won. Now he's just this whiny, deranged man. And yes, his cultists love him, but there are people who voted for Biden instead of him. And he's lost a lot of key voters. And people want to say, hey, um, your Liz Cheney's and your Adam Kissinger's were late to the party by saying January's, they voted for him twice and January 6th was the breaking point. But if that's a segment of the population, that is still not good for Trump. There are people who voted for him twice who are like, you tried to overthrow the country. That's it. I'm either
Yeah.
staying at home or I'm going to vote for Biden. So the challenge I see for Democrats is that, and God love them, they don't really want to talk about the indictment. And there was something from one of the Biden's people of like, we don't really want to talk about this per se. We want to focus on the wonderful economic record and all the cool stuff we've done. And that is not, I mean, that's not why the Senate, that's not why Democrats still have the Senate, or why it wasn't a red wave in 2022. That was because
Yeah.
of, all right, you overturned Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court's out of control. I think the best chance is to fight the rising tide of fascism, which is just like, yeah, the economy is not great for everyone right now. We can go into
No, it's not.
specifics. It's not
And I
great for
think that
everyone
we
right
do
now.
need to absolutely be focused on more ways in which Republicans do hurt the economy and continue to do so. Actually, I was talking to our friend Michael today, our coworker, about the fact that one of the best things that Democrats could do, and it's slightly, it's like somewhat of a change in topic, is back at will employment and to keep or sorry to get or that getting rid of at will employment. It is the absolute best thing they could do in terms of a promoting, like, giving people economic security, so they didn't know that they can't be randomly fired from their jobs for no reason,
Hmm.
and also put Republicans on defense, having to explain, no, we think that your boss should be able to fire you for literally no reason. It's also probably like, I would say one of the most effective ways to deal with, like, employment, discrimination while people are, you know, actually employed, and firing people for discriminatory reasons, because instead of putting people, the onus on people who are discriminated against to prove, hey, I have all my files here and like a PowerPoint presentation on how I was discriminated against. Please let me do my equal opportunity employment
Hmm.
thing. Um, the onus would be on the business owners to and the bosses to prove that they fired them for just cause, which is like a pretty huge
Yeah.
thing. We're the
Um,
only and I realize I whine about at will employment a lot, but we are the only country in the world that does this, and probably the smartest economic. It's probably one of the smartest economic arguments that Democrats could jump on. It also doesn't cost anything.
well, it costs
Like,
them donor money. A lot of, I
yeah,
mean,
but like,
Democrats like being
yeah,
pro business, and it's not particularly seen as pro business. And having worked in the corporate world, the way around, I mean,
but
the
no one's pro business
perception
anymore.
the perception in the corporate world is that it's already too difficult to fire people. Fair or not, it's already too difficult to fire people. The best way to avoid bad fits is, and Amazon does this and others, is where it's like um, the trials of Hercules to get fired, where
Mhm.
you're doing all this upfront stuff but most of it is trying to, it's almost like e-harm or whatever. Okay, I'm going to make sure I get the right person. And so what happens is often a lot of the discrimination gets moved
Yeah.
to the front end, which is because it's much harder, obviously, when you're not been employed by someone to prove that, well, you don't even know who they've been interviewing and what their qualifications are. And
Hmm.
so that tends to be one of the challenges with that. I mean, I think would be preferable to remove at will employment, but I think again, it's not something Democrats are ever going to leap upon. I think one of the challenges is that right now, specifically Biden, White House Democrat, it's that the economy is great, and to lecture to people about how great the economy becoming, and I just think that's dangerous. I just think that, like, what I see from the White House press secretary about the last time um, unemployment was this low, uh, I the Jackson Fives, "I Want You Back" was number one, which is a fun factoid. That's probably why she gets invited to parties, but it's not like, okay, like, what if I'm reading this? The thing also about pushing low unemployment when people aren't crazy about the economy, the reason that's dangerous is because, you know, it's like when you're single versus when you're in a really bad relationship. When you're single, there's kind of hope, right? Like you
Yeah.
think like, okay, but when you're like in the bad relationship and then it's like I hate everything about my life, everything's terrible is less. And so yeah, if you have a job but everything costs more and your rent's higher and now you've got two jobs, like, oh great, this is I've got all these jobs. I've got two of them. It's like the In Living Color sketch of Haymon with the people of all the jobs. It's like, well, yeah, great, but my I really hate my life right now, and I think you just really, I think there needs to be, and this is a controversial opinion among many Democrats, is to not try to do a victory lap and try to remind people that they're happy. Generally, people don't
Yeah,
need to be reminded that they're happy and told with facts about why they're happy. It needs to be, look, here's what's happening. Here's what, as you said, Republicans are going to make your life worse while also denying your existence if you're queer or whatever. But um, we get that it's been tough coming out of this economy. Here's what we've done that Republicans have not helped with, and here's how we're going to do
exactly. Like it's
make things further. But you've got to recognize that there is an issue. To recognize that high interest rates, the brutality that has on folks who are not just homeowners but trying to rent. You've been saving up to buy a house, and you're told now
mhm.
that, like, okay, well, your down payment is only going to get you not as much house and not the neighborhood you wanted. And if you buy a house now, you're going to be locked in on a certain, you're going to be paying far more in interest before you even
Yeah.
get any equity now than you were before. That's what people are feeling. And then similar
And
to,
because like the housing market is so tight, that is also driving up rent prices
mhm,
because people who can't get houses are renting. And so people who like can't afford to get houses and are renting because of that, the prices go up for them as well.
yeah,
So like,
I,
it's
no,
and
definitely. And I
we're
get
really bad
really
at housing
concerned.
people.
Yeah, well, we're not, and that's a
Yeah.
way that impacts people right at the line. And for us to not be in front of that and recognizing that pain for like lower middle class
Yeah.
homeowners. So it's not just well off people who are kind of like, oh, this sucks. I've got to find another 10 grand for my down payment, or I've got to like, I won't, for middle class people who are
Yeah.
hoping this is how I was going to retire. And it's like, what? I can't retire because by the time I ever actually accumulate any value in this house, or specifically, one thing I keep seeing a lot of Democrats push the idea that wages are keeping track with and perhaps exceeding inflation. And, maybe for certain people, but for a lot of Democratic voters, particularly people of color
Mhm.
or working class people, one, just from a reality check, do you know any Starbucks baristas who are making who have what they were making like in 2019 versus now is equal, has exceeded, like they've gotten raises to exceed
Mhm.
the rate of inflation? I don't think so. I think a
Yeah.
lot of folks are feeling this in real ways, and you've got to. I just go back to when I was a kid, relatively, because I was adult at the time, but when the sitting president, George H.W. Bush, was sort of like, everything's fine.
Yeah.
And Clinton was the one like, what the hell are you talking about? It's not fine, and I'm going to fix it. So
Yeah.
generally, the person who recognizes the problem and has solutions wins. And that goes back to 2016. Trump did not have solutions, but he recognized problems, especially in the
Mhm.
Midwest, that Democrats, you've written about this with NAFTA and other issues that were
Yeah.
hitting those folks. And the
And
Democratic
this is the
position
thing,
was there's
Democrats
no
said the
problem.
same thing then. Like they kept saying, no, actually everyone loved NAFTA and thought NAFTA was super great. It was wonderful. And I'm like, no, I'm like, I know this for a fact. And people will be like, well, be like people who like definitely did not grow up in industrial cities, who are like, oh, these are, NAFTA was fantastic for the poor. And I'm like, I literally went to school like every week with people like everyone's parents being laid off. It was horrifying. Like, um, and this is the thing when you try and tell people like they're having a good time or that something was like really traumatizing for them was actually a super great time for everyone and they just didn't notice. They usually think, they're usually pretty good
No.
at figuring out that you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Democrats are less good at the secreting than Republicans are. Really, like we're not good
Well,
at it.
well, what Michael had just about the case, making
Yeah,
the case about obstruction, I would respectfully state that one problem is I don't know. There's going to be a certain limit to that voters have for
they didn't let
democratic,
us do the thing.
well, democratic fecklessness.
Yeah,
Like that, okay, well, if you can create a world where no Republicans exist, it's like, a law enforcement. It's like, we can stop crime if you have a pill that makes criminals go away. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. Like, I presume your law enforcement strategy
yeah,
involves the existence of criminals. Because one example, and it's something, a larger thing we haven't discussed. So currently, there's this hold, weeks, almost months long hold on military promotions, actively impacting military readiness. Human lives have been affected by this hold, like people not knowing what home they can buy, how they're going to retire, all sorts, because Tommy Tuberville has decided that, oh well, um I don't like the Pentagon's abortion policy or whatever, and I'm going to, this is my punishment. And so, Republicans, and I mean, Democrats, including Biden, it's like, well, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. And how dare you do this? But at the same time, we're all kind of like, okay, well, you're the president and Democrats control the Senate. How, like, it's always a sense of this, the Senate rules exist in a way that when in the minority, Republicans still seem to have total power.
yeah.
And when, except for a couple things that they let us do, that it feels like it's like McConnell's like, okay, you can do this. I won't stop it. Um, or, but like, there's no world, like, they're like, and I said, like, well, why aren't they just well, you can't leverage this for, Republicans to feel no shame. And it's like, I mean, if Elizabeth Warren had been during the Trump administration saying, unless Trump backs off on X, I'm going to put a hold on military promotions, it would not have lasted. The Schumer would have been calling her on the carpet. All Democrats
Yeah.
would have voted on her. So it just looks as if we never have power when in power. And so that becomes less effective. I know one issue with,
It's the thinking, it's like it's almost like when people think that like self-deprecation makes them look better when in fact it just makes people agree with them. Like
mhm,
if you're like, I look terrible.
mhm.
And yes, I was whining that my new haircut makes me look like Imogene Coca, but after I got it cut because I was freaking out a little bit. But like if you keep telling people like, oh, there, our stuff just isn't that popular. People don't really want it, and you're not really fighting for it. People tend to just like pick up on what, they assume that you're the authority. Like they always assume that you're the best authority on yourself. So if you're like, hey, this is shit we really need to fight for. This is, something that or like or if like say like someone in the Democratic Party does, does like did do something like that, they do the whole like, oh well, we're gonna really like go after them to show everyone how like, fair we are,
Well,
and
the rules are never so
never
like,
translates the way people want it to.
yeah. So with the military promotions, the idea is, and this had happened with Dianne Feinstein. It's another issue we should discuss. So the idea, she's not all there. Should have retired, but the defenders say she can't retire because the mean Republicans won't let Democrats replace her on the Judiciary Committee. And it's like, again, both then and with this, with changing the rules so that Tuberville can't just
Mhm.
block these promotions, it comes down to Manchin and Sinema. They are the problems. They are the ones who will not agree to get rid of the goddamn filibuster for these specific rules changes. They are the ones who are blocking military readiness because they love the military too much.
Yeah.
They are the ones who are allowing this anti-democratic wheeling, weekend at Bernieing of someone. They are the ones you should challenge them, because they are the ones arguably more likely to feel shame than Tommy Tuberville or Ted Cruz.
Oh, I'm sorry. I like that's so cute of you to think that Kristen Cinema or is like capable of feeling anything close to shame. I don't.
No, but she is
I
probably
can't picture it.
arguably. she's supposed to be arguably closer. That if to
Okay.
me, if if you're talking about your ability to work across the aisle and you can't get Manchin to agree on something, but somehow we're supposed to help. So that's when
Yeah.
voters are kind of like, oh, I guess you can't really do anything. You can't even control people in your own party over something like this. And that's, there's concern that black voters will not turn out. Basically, there's an article about this. We Everyone understands that it's not about persuasion. The only real persuasion in the voting in elections now is about turnout, getting enough of your
Yeah.
people to show up. And there's concern that black people might not show up in at 2020 levels because didn't get voting rights, or things that the economy's been hitting specific groups of black people harder
Mhm.
than others. And that's when everyone's like, oh, but Trump might come back, please vote for us. Okay, well, now you want to talk about Trump, so you want to scare black people about Trump, but for suburban white people you want to talk about a road you built. It's like, okay, well, that's a
Yeah.
very inconsistent message.
And like,
um
and they want to be like, here's what we did for you. And if you got to have more, here's what we did for you. Like, just to voters in general. Like, hey, we got you this. And there's not a lot of that.
the Dianne Feinstein thing is, so this week it was revealed that Dianne Feinstein's daughter, who is in her 60s, which of course she is, because Dianne Feinstein's 90. Her daughter has power of attorney over Dianne Feinstein, whereas Dianne Feinstein is still a
Yeah.
sitting senator who is voting. So, like, what does that mean? Is that like, like she can't enter contracts for a house or whatever, but she's voting based on how her staff tells her? And there was a very, I covered this last week, a very concerning exchange where she clearly like was not aware of where she
Yeah.
was, and the person in her staff, and Patty Murray, the senator from Washington, is telling, just say yes,
Yeah.
which is what you want to see in a democracy, is people just telling like a very confused old woman, just say yes. And yeah, she's voting the way we want her to vote, but that is not what how our nation should be functioning. But
No, no, not so much. And, we're not total like if we were Republicans, yes, we'd be like, all that matters is that someone is voting the way that we want them to vote. And it's better to have someone who's going to vote the way that we want them to vote than anything else. But it would be really nice if we didn't have to do that. Like the alternative is clearly preferable. Especially when it just means maybe having some amount of chutzpah, not being
uh
so scared.
yes, exactly.
For real, yeah. Like, it's like,
uh
I
yes, what is it
what if
about
there's a
NAFTA?
serial killer on the loose? Sorry.
NAFTA was sold as paying people in other countries a good wage and building up their economy. Their healthy economy would benefit the world as a whole, a spark to ignite countries out of poverty. It was a lie, of course. It was another way to save money on labor, the great migration of manufacturing for corporate profits,
I
which
don't
is.
know that anyone actually, did people believe that? I mean, I know that I did not, and I was like, what, like 7? Um,
But you are a you are not everyone, Robin.
True,
That's how it was sold. Obviously, it's like that is that was even in
no,
fact.
it wasn't. I thought it was just sold as like, hey, businesses are gonna be able to pay people less, and, like,
No, I mean, the West Wings particularly, which is a very big mainstream liberal show. The West Wing had a couple of specific call outs to promoting free trade, and that free trade promoted democracy across the world. And you create free trade, that prevents violence and wars. It doesn't essentially allow corporations to make grand profits, and working people in parts of the country to barely survive and then turn to fascists, which is what happened, and one could argue would be more destabilizing. Not that I am an isolationist. I just believe that what occurs is that when you have poorer people everywhere, they get desperate and turn to uh, fascist leaders, and that's what we saw. And so,
Yeah. Like it did not exactly work out well. And I don't want to use the term, like, I wouldn't say isolationist. Like, I think, the UN is great. Let's all, like, rely on each other for stuff. That's fine. But I'm also super opposed to war in general. I am very opposed to the amount that we spend on defense. And I think that a lot of the ways that we do, like, help other countries is not necessarily, like, good, especially, not to get back to, like, 1999 or whatever, but, like, we're, the World Bank and everything would give people, like, these countries that were run by dictators, a lot of money, and they'd spend it on, like, crap instead of giving it to the people. And then the people would depose the dictators, and then the countries would be still, like, on the hook for all of that money, and they would remain in poverty because they still owed the World Bank all that money that the, dictator person had wasted. And that's not exactly a great solution either. Like, we need things that are kind of, but this is the thing, like, we're not even doing that in our own country. Like, we're not even helping the poor in our own country. So it's very hard to be like, we have know exactly how to help people all across the world. Like, we should not, maybe not be in charge of that until we can figure out healthcare and, like, housing the 500,000 homeless people in this country. Like, they're
well,
maybe not
yeah, it
like,
is a tendency, I think, because the Democratic establishment talks to the Republican establishment. So something like NAFTA, free trade, a lot of these things were these areas because um, the idea of often the concern about bipartisanship is that it's really about rich people
oh
of
yeah,
different political parties agreeing on how to screw poor people everywhere. That's usually the concern with those
yeah,
kind of bipartisan deals. So they're sort of in that bubble, and especially among Democrats, not recognizing concerns amongst the people they're supposed to be representing, specifically Black people.
yeah,
So even going back,
absolutely.
I grew up, Black people were concerned about, well, what about us? Why are you concerned about folks in these other places? What about, we can barely make,
Mhm.
our rent? Those were the similar concerns that later were perceived as being um inherently racist. Only racists believe this. That was a 2016 reaction. It's like, well, that's not actually true. I heard folks who weren't racist because they were, people
Yeah.
of color who are concerned about this, losing jobs, losing their jobs to immigration and so forth. So that was an area of concern that was sort of ignored. Um, and that's sort of a problem. I do, it's a slight digression, but I'm going to talk about your haircut. I mean, with respect to Michael, he's wrong. Your hair looks nothing
I
like
don't know who that
Lois Lane, the Superman's
I know who
girlfriend.
she is. I just
But
don't know.
there were the first film version, a cartoon version of her in the I think early 40s in it. But it flips in the back. So it's, you imagine the hair comes in, it flips in the back. Yours is
Mine
not flipping
actually
in the back,
does because I
but
couldn't
not
figure
in the
out where to
front.
put
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
But there's stuff coming in the front here, which
Yeah.
does not look like how
Okay.
hers does, and her bangs were um I don't want to say more successful. That we don't need to end it on that.
No,
But
I
I'm just saying.
haven't. Yeah. I said 47,000 times, I have naturally curly hair. It shrinks. Like,
you know,
but no one ever believes me.
I think he my, it was intended as a compliment. It's not.
And
It's not what
I
is.
mean,
It's not what you're
you can't
presenting.
have inaccuracies in cartoons that I don't know, in comic book things. Like, that's very important that all of the comparisons to cartoon comic book characters are accurate.
All right. So it's more like Prince Valiant. Yes, that is actually. I'm sorry. That is true. It is more Prince Valiant than Lois Lane from the Fleischer
I'm
era.
still saying Imogene
Um,
Coca, which is, not a compliment to myself, but, or to
uh,
no one knows what I'm talking about, but it's like, except for you. Imogene Coca
so
does not have good hair, is what I'm saying.
Anything else to add before we move take off for the week?
I think I am a little too allergy medicined out to come up with anything else. Like, should I be talking? Not even sure.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Well, we will. I'm in Seattle next Sunday, and I think I might have to. My wife's firm is, and my son excited about this. They're seeing a Mariners game, which I believe is a baseball team in Seattle, and I might have to attend. I don't. So we'll talk about either
Okay. All right.
pre-recording or not,
Fine.
or figuring out how to save myself from this. Um, it is not that. It is it is more He-Man.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry that you're my friend at, but clearly Michael is just, it's like he sees you and only sees the best. That is true friendship.
Let's
And
see.
I'm
Yeah.
this catty middle-aged
You
man.
are a catty bitch.
It's like, no, no, no. It is not that. It is actually this, which is He-Man, Imaging Coco, and Prince Valiant. I'm, so, I'm
Because I
sorry.
haven't cried enough this week, sir.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending our Donald Trump indictment special. The third, our fourth will be, I'm sure, upcoming once the indictment hammer falls in Georgia, and we might have we'll try to wrangle up Jamie Lynn Cross for that as well. It's always fun to talk about the specific
Yay.
legal challenges Trump is facing. So thank you, everyone. Remember, like, share, subscribe, spread the love to everyone, clip out parts of it or whatever, and everything. We'll talk to you
Yes.
soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.